what we're learning in the Times this morning, that, we'll see a big speech, the first policy speech, that he wants to overhaul it, that he's looking at the NHS principle, so free at the point of need, and that could cost £18.5 billion a year.
Now, let's get some analysis on the key political stories from Lara Spirit, Deputy Political Editor of the Sunday Times. Hello, Lara.
Hi, good morning.
You're in the studio. It's much more exciting when people are in the studio. It's nice.
I'm always in the studio because I'm always in this office on a Saturday. This is a full working day for me.
Is it? Okay, well, there you go. We won't linger too long on this because everyone in the country's doing week one of Andy Burnham pieces. But if you were to grade him on delivering on his week one plans in school report terms, sorry about this, what grade are you giving him? What sticks out?
Oh, I don't know. In terms of a crude grade, I'm not sure. I think it's fair to say that they feel pretty confident with how the week has gone. They had a string of announcements on the cost of living to deliver what Burnham refers to as breathing space. They wanted this week to be filled with a vibe that was kind of hopeful, but also one in which Burnham communicated the fact that he felt that he understood people were struggling with the cost of living. I think they will feel that they've succeeded in doing that. The reshuffle, while having alienated quite a lot of Starmer supporters, I think they felt that was probably going to be inevitable. They've got a top team around Andy Burnham now installed who they are confident with. They've now completed parts of those junior ministerial reshuffles as well. They feel that that's gone well. And they had their first meeting in number 10 North as well, which has been hastily erected. So from their perspective, they would say it's gone well. I think critics of Andy Burnham would, of course, wager that perhaps there was some questions around the funding of some of those proposals that we saw this week. What does that mean going forward? Also questions about whether or not that reshuffle has unnecessarily elevated and agitated some of those who might well have been brought to heel as potential Burnham loyalists. Let's see going forward. But at the moment, we've had that big week. We've got one more big week of announcements next week, and then we'll be waiting for a big bang in September where we'll see that kind of 10-year plan and a bigger picture about what Burnham stands for.
I mean, on the plus side, there was no major sort of screw-up, was there?
No, I think it's fair to say that there was not a major screw-up. I think the moment of perhaps peak vulnerability, or at least the moment at which people were suggesting this might be a rocky road, was that intervention from Darren Jones, formerly the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, who posted on X the morning of that announcement that there would be VAT cut from energy bills, that actually that policy was uncosted because it was coming from a scheme that was itself uncosted, and that as a result of that they would have to set out how that scheme would be paid for, signalling perhaps that there might be trouble ahead for some of those so-called dispossessed that are leaving the government now after Starmer's departure.
Do you think those were sort of departing shots, or they are going to kind of create a little bulk?
I mean, Darren Jones is a very interesting example. There are two there are two politicians. One of them has actually remained in a senior position, albeit having been demoted. But there are two politicians who served in Starmer's government who have either been demoted or sacked, for whom I'm getting a lot of messages at the moment. And that is Bridget Phillipson, who is, of course, the former Education Secretary, demoted to Women and Equalities Minister, and Darren Jones, who was himself, who left the government entirely. And those two are seen as the kind of big flashpoints for some of these MPs who are upset because they feel that actually they worked quite constructively with the transition team in their view, that they were sort of trying to be helpful, that they weren't out and out quote unquote Starmer loyalists, that they were loyal to the Prime Minister and did what they could to make sure that this transition was smooth and successful. And I think there'd been a hope, particularly in the case of Darren Jones, I think there might have been an expectation that there would be some job at the end of that in government. So I mean, particularly in the case of Jones, there'd been support on things like the budget as well. Jones made trips to Makerfield, the constituency that Andy Burnham was standing in to become an MP. So he will definitely be a powerful backbencher now, I think it's fair to say. Similarly, Bridget Phillipson demoted. I don't think there's necessarily fears about what she herself would do, but there are MPs that have been getting in touch with me proactively this week to say that they are really quite unhappy to have seen her demoted, that she was dealing well with the Parliamentary Labour Party on send reforms, those very controversial and difficult send reforms, that was being held up as a model of how to deal with a kind of restive Labour parliamentary party, particularly after what we saw on the question of welfare, and that actually she has to leave while, for example, Pat McFadden, who's being kept on, the lone kind of Starmerite being kept on in that cabinet, you would say, of the kind of core number of them in that Work and Pension Secretary brief? Why is it they say that Bridget doesn't get to do her Sen reforms, but Pat gets to do his welfare reforms? So I don't know how important that's going to be going forward. I just think that's been the initial reaction so far. And I think, as I say, I think the Burnham team feel very confident that this is all kind of, just slight teething pains, but nothing too much to worry about.
So they'll keep a little eye on the mift of the backbenchers. Yes. The launch of Number 10 North, I mean, to me that feels a little performative, or is it something more serious than that? Surely it's only really going to mean something if you see cabinet members up there on a regular basis and stuff happening, or is it just going to be his TikTok? Is it going to be his TikTok crew?
I don't think it's going to be his TikTok crew. I'm sure that there will be social media people who are there, and we can talk about the importance and centrality of social media to this first week. It's been a really big part.
About that in a minute. Yeah.
It's been a really big part of their messaging, and I think quite an interesting departure in some ways from the way that Keir Starmer might have done media, all-encompassing, so to speak. But on this question of Number 10 North, there have been cabinet ministers. So yesterday there were a number of very senior cabinet ministers, including John Healey, the Chancellor, who were with Andy Burnham at that initial meeting at Number 10 North in Manchester.
It didn't look great.
You don't think aesthetically you were that impressed? I mean, we have to remember that, of course,
I know
it's
they
quite
put it
hard
together
to find.
in 2 days.
Exactly, they put it together very quickly. The site that they want to use isn't actually going to be ready for quite a bit longer.
Yeah.
So they've done their best with this. It's obviously hard for security reasons, as well as a plethora of other reasons, to get a whole new outpost of Number 10 up and running in a short space of time, particularly when the transition was really quite short for Keir Starmer leaving and Andy Burnham taking over. But they are absolutely adamant, and Andy Burnham has said this himself explicitly, that this is not a gimmick. They haven't just rented a WeWork or something like that. No, exactly. And they are saying, there's going to be real economic power that Number 10 North will have. It will have a lot of control over local growth plans, over devolution. These are things that are very important to Andy Burnham going forward, and they're determined to make sure that this is seen as a really proper, serious Number 10 office. And so time will tell on this, obviously, but we know that Andy Burnham wants to spend time there every week. We know that other cabinet ministers are planning on spending time there every week as well. Let's see how that goes, but at the moment I think there's a really concerted effort to as they would say in Mean Girls, make Number 10 North happen. Nice. I've been asked to point out, obviously there are other places you can do temporary workspaces, but it's very impressive to get that all put together that quickly. Talking of his TikTok crew, it is extraordinary how we've gone from the most stilted, unexciting Prime Minister in Starmer, I think, to someone who's almost maybe doing too much. What do you make of Burnham's social media game at the moment? Yesterday, he posted a video of himself and the new Chancellor, John Healey, rating bar snacks. Yeah. Is that the way forward? Did you watch it? I did. Yeah. I did, and that's maybe the main test, because but I watch all sorts of nonsense on TikTok. It doesn't mean I want them running the country. I mean, it's an interesting question. One of the reasons why there have been criticisms about it is because it's come while Burnham has I think shunned is probably too strong a word, but particularly in this first week, slightly avoided the kind of big traditional set-piece broadcast interviews that you might do, and not entirely, we should say. Yeah. He did take questions from political editors when he became Prime Minister on Monday, albeit fairly briefly. That was cut short because there was a call from President Trump that came in. It's been reported in the Times. He also did an interview with the Times that was published on Monday as he became on the day he became Prime Minister, and has done broadcast clips and questions here and there this week, and I'm sure we will see more in the days ahead. But it's certainly the case that we've seen a huge amount of him on social media this week. This is no accident. This is a big social first strategy, right? They are very, very keen to make sure that he connects with voters in a different way. And this was one of the real things that MPs and allies of Andy Burnham would cite to you when they were desperate to see him have a seat and stand in Makerfield and eventually come down and lead the Labour Party and the country, was he gets communication, he's capable of connecting with voters. And, the numbers are pretty impressive on a lot of this content, so I think they would feel very happy about how it's gone. But I guess you're right that perhaps there's a slight dissonance when you're introducing yourself to people and you feel like perhaps that's not serious enough. Some people might say that. But I think it is interesting. I mean, play the exercise of, could you imagine Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves having done that and it not having been slightly excruciating? I would have enjoyed it in its cringiness, but it would have been terrible. There were people online that were saying, this is not at all cringeworthy. And I was like, well, no, this is obviously cringeworthy. And that's kind of fine. I don't think that they would think this isn't without any sort of cringe. But I'm obviously among those who watches all of these things because it's part of my job.
There was a great bit in the Times today about the TikTok teens who helped carry Burnham to number 10.
Yes.
I mean, who are they? And they made an interesting point that if they were male, because they're mainly female, the people
but not exclusively, but yeah, they are.
But they were saying that they're still seen as not a serious thing, whereas if they were, male, they'd be special advisors or whatever. Do you think that's
right? I don't know. I mean, they're playing for Burnham, a very interesting, important, and in some senses a very novel role. Like, they were fixtures in Makerfield in the by-election campaign. They obviously really helped there, and it's certainly the case that people around, Burnham think that there's a lot of value in the work that they do. But there's also, alongside those who are doing it on his behalf, there is also, the coordinated effort to get Burnham, for example, to do videos with influencers. So you saw him do the career ladder this week, for example, which is an influencer who you stand on a ladder with. It's a very simple format. And so this is a way to get him to tease out these kinds of things. And there was a moment, of course, shortly before he became Prime Minister, where he had done an interview where he'd been talking about, for example, how he puts his milk in his tea first. And that did make some people quite frustrated because they felt like actually there were a number of quite important questions they wanted to ask him about politics.
Yeah, and sugar.
When he became... Yeah, and that actually we're learning about these more casual parts, perhaps, of his character. But actually, I think there is a real value in that form of communication as well. And at the moment, it seems like they're doing it pretty successfully.
So Burnham's he's got plans to set out his policy on tackling the social care issue in the coming week. What do we know about the announcement, and does it sound achievable?
Yeah, so we don't know the full picture of exactly what we'll be seeing in terms of adult social care next week, but the big theme and the kind of guiding mission of what we'll see from Andy Burnham next week will be a sense of if this week it was about making sure that voters saw quick, tangible action on the cost of living, which is something we know that they're impatient to see progress on, then next week is about showing voters that Andy Burnham is not running away from the very difficult questions and difficult issues that previously politicians might have kicked into the long grass. Social care is to Burnham the absolute prime example of that. This is something that Baroness Casey, who's of course your absolute your biggest Whitehall troubleshooter, has been at the helm of many of these issues in the past, has been looking at. But what we're learning in the Times this morning, that we'll see a big speech, his first policy speech, that he wants to overhaul it, that he's looking at the NHS principle, so free at the point of need, and that could cost £18.5 billion a year. But this is universal, yes, but it's actually not likely to cover some of the important daily living costs, so a care home, laundry, food, accommodation, energy bills. So I think there are some outstanding questions about exactly how much we'll see from that next week.
And finally, US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has called for new Defence Secretary Wes Streeting to attend a summit on the Strait of Hormuz next week. A power play?
Well, this is very interesting. I mean, everyone is watching these relationships very closely because, of course, the so-called special relationship is always front of mind when we're considering whether or not we will see something of a blow-up between this new regime and the US. At the moment, it looks like the early vital signs are pretty good. There was a warm call between President Trump and Andy Burnham, like I mentioned earlier this week, after he became Prime Minister. We had a meeting between Marco Rubio and Ed Miliband, the new Foreign Secretary, which was described to me as having gone smoothly too. And then, of course, as we've read in Bloomberg, that Pete Hegseth has requested that Wes Streeting host this meeting in London to discuss the Strait of Hormuz. Now, it's difficult because, of course, exactly where Burnham wants to land on cooperation with the US over the war in Iran is an outstanding question. It could be a problem with the public, who we know are very sceptical of this conflict, but also Labour MPs who are also in a similar place to that. But then you also want to make sure that you're setting off the relationship on a strong footing. So let's see. I think, as I understand at the moment, no final decision on this has necessarily been made, but definitely one to keep an eye on.